When you think of Hyrule's most sacred places, your mind probably drifts to sunlight and legends, glittering lakes, ancient temples basking in divine light, stories carved in gold and memory. But not every chapter of Hyrule's past was written under the sun. Some truths were buried deep, locked away where no prayer could reach them. Hidden beneath the quiet streets of Kakariko Village lies something far different and far darker. A place built on fear. A place the kingdom would rather you never knew existed. Where stone drank tears, where metal met bone, and where voices once begged for mercy that never came. The Shadow Temple isn't a trial. It's a graveyard of secrets. A wound carved into Hyrule's history, still pulsing, still whispering in the dark. Tonight, we descend into that forgotten abyss, where torture devices stand frozen in time, where the dead cling to the cold walls that betrayed them, where the truth was chained and left to rot. Welcome to the Shadow Temple. The light never reached here, and it never wanted to. Kakariko Village presents itself as a haven of simplicity, a humble settlement nestled at the base of Death Mountain, where common folk live quiet lives tending to their daily needs. But this peaceful exterior masks a history far more complex and troubling than most of its residents could imagine. Long before it opened its doors to Hyrule's poor and displaced, Kakariko was something else entirely. A Sheikah village, home to the shadow folk who served as the royal family's most trusted and dangerous servants. The transformation from Sheikah settlement to common refuge wasn't merely an act of generosity. It was a calculated decision wrapped in layers of political necessity and concealed shame. When Impa, the last prominent Sheikah in the village, made the choice to open Kakariko to outsiders, she wasn't just sharing resources. She was diluting a legacy, perhaps deliberately, obscuring what this place had witnessed over the centuries. The cheerful voices of children playing in the streets now echo where once only the disciplined footsteps of shadow warriors tread. Walk through the village today, and you'll find yourself surrounded by the mundane. A windmill turning lazily in the breeze, a construction site where workers toil under the sun, shops selling bottles and fish. But look closer. Pay attention to what lies at the edges, and the village's true nature begins to reveal itself. The graveyard, for instance, isn't simply where villagers lay their dead to rest. It sprawls across the eastern section of the village with an unusual prominence, containing not just common graves, but elaborate tombs, mysterious inscriptions, and most tellingly, members of the royal family itself. This graveyard holds particular significance that most visitors overlook. Behind its rows of weathered headstones, past where mourners typically venture, rises an elevated platform carved directly into the cliff face. The construction here is different from the rest of the village, older, more deliberate, created with a purpose that goes beyond simple burial rites. Ancient Sheikah symbols mark the stonework, their meaning lost to all but a few who still remember the old ways. At the center of this platform stands a peculiar structure, a tunnel entrance sealed with massive stone doors. No ordinary barrier, this entrance bears the hallmarks of deliberate concealment. The ceiling wasn't recent. Layers of dirt and growth suggest years, perhaps decades of undisturbed isolation. Yet the seal itself shows signs of sophisticated construction, the kind of work that requires both engineering skill and knowledge of more esoteric arts. Someone or something was meant to stay behind those doors, kept separate from the world above. The entrance's placement speaks to careful planning. Positioned directly behind the graveyard, elevated above the village proper, yet hidden from casual view. This was never meant for public access. The few villagers who speak of it do so in hushed tones, and most won't speak of it at all. Even the village's elders, those who might remember the days before the Sheikah's decline, maintain a studied silence on the matter. Their reluctance isn't born of ignorance, but of knowledge, an understanding that some doors should remain closed, some secrets better left undisturbed. Yet the taboo surrounding this place runs deeper than mere village superstition. The royal family itself has classified everything relating to what lies beyond those sealed doors as forbidden knowledge. No official records exist in Hyrule's archives. No maps mark its location. No histories record its purpose. This absence of information is itself telling. Such thorough erasure requires deliberate effort at the highest levels of power. Whatever lies beyond that seal wasn't simply forgotten. It was purposefully struck from memory. The Sheikah's historical role adds another layer of complexity to this mystery. As the royal family's devoted servants, they operated in the spaces between light and shadow, performing tasks that official histories would never record. They were bodyguards and spies, warriors and mystics, bound by sacred oaths to serve Hyrule's throne without question. Their presence in Kakariko wasn't coincidental. This village served as their base of operations, the place where they trained, planned, and executed the crown's most sensitive missions. Understanding the Sheikah means understanding that they operated by different moral codes than ordinary Hylians. What others might view as cruel or unthinkable, the Sheikah saw as necessary for the kingdom's protection. They were the knife in the darkness, the poison in the cup, the silent blade that removed threats before they could materialize. Their loyalty was absolute, their methods unquestioned, their actions hidden from public scrutiny. In many ways, they were Hyrule's necessary evil, maintaining the kingdom's peace through means that would horrify those they protected. The village well presents another puzzle piece in this shadowy history. Positioned prominently in the village square, it appears unremarkable, a simple stone structure providing water to the community. Children play around it, adults draw water from its depths, and life continues in its mundane rhythm. But this well, like so much in Kakariko, conceals more than it reveals. Beneath its ordinary appearance lies something that caused the Sheikah to take extraordinary precautions, implementing seals and barriers that speak to genuine fear of what might escape. The well's importance becomes clearer when one considers its position relative to the sealed entrance behind the graveyard. These 2 points, one in the village's heart, one at its edge, form a kind of axis around which Kakariko's hidden history revolves. They're connected not just geographically, but spiritually. 2 parts of a larger whole that the village's transformation into a civilian settlement was perhaps meant to obscure. The innocent appearance of the well, surrounded by the daily life of common folk, serves as perfect camouflage for whatever significance it truly holds. As twilight falls across Kakariko village and shadows lengthen between the houses, the settlement takes on a different character. The laughter fades, doors close, and windows shutter against the night. It's in these quiet hours that one can almost sense the village's true nature, not a peaceful haven, but a guardian post, watching over secrets that should never see the light of day. The transformation from Sheikah stronghold to civilian settlement wasn't evolution, but concealment, a way to hide in plain sight what should never be found. The stage is set for darker revelations. Behind that sealed door, beneath that innocent well, in the spaces between what's known and what's hidden, lies a truth that the royal family has spent generations trying to bury. The Shadow Temple waits in darkness, patient and eternal, a monument to deeds that history has tried desperately to forget. Every stone in Kakariko village was placed with purpose, every building positioned with intent, all of it designed to contain and conceal something that should never have existed, yet does, waiting in the darkness for those brave or foolish enough to seek it out. The Shadow Temple's architecture tells a story written in stone and blood, each chamber revealing another chapter of Hyrule's darkest narrative. When the hero of time first breaks the seal and descends into this forbidden place, he enters not just a dungeon, but a carefully constructed nightmare, a space designed with deliberate intent to contain, torture, and ultimately destroy both body and spirit. The initial chamber greets visitors with an inscription that sets the tone for everything that follows. Carved into ancient stone, the words speak with the authority of ages past. Here lies the concentrated power of Hyrule's darkness, gathered and confined within these walls. The phrasing is precise, deliberate, not darkness from outside sources, but Hyrule's own darkness, the shadow cast by the kingdom's supposedly enlightened rule. This isn't a place where evil was fought and defeated. It's where evil was cultivated, practiced, and perfected under official sanction. The inscription continues with a cryptic reference to the Eye of Truth, establishing immediately that nothing in this temple can be trusted at face value. Reality itself becomes unreliable within these walls. Platforms exist that the naked eye cannot perceive, walls conceal passages that shouldn't exist, and danger lurks in spaces that appear empty. The Sheikah who built this place understood that the most effective prison is one where the prisoners cannot trust their own senses, where every step might lead to a fall into darkness, where safety is always an illusion waiting to be shattered. Moving deeper into the temple, one encounters the boat chamber, a vast underground cavern where an ancient ferry waits eternally at a dock carved from solid rock. The vessel itself defies easy description, constructed from materials that seem to absorb light rather than reflect it, decorated with imagery that shifts between sacred and profane, depending on the angle of observation. This boat was clearly built for a specific purpose that goes beyond mere transportation. The ferry's design incorporates symbolism from multiple death traditions, yet belongs fully to none of them. The prow bears the carved image of a figure whose features have been deliberately obscured, perhaps eroded by time, perhaps never fully defined to begin with. Some see in it the face of a psychopomp, a guide of souls. Others see the visage of a judge, weighing the sins of the dead. The truth might be that it was meant to be both, or neither, or something else entirely, that modern minds can no longer comprehend. What makes the ferry particularly unsettling is its state of preservation. In a temple filled with decay and ruin, this boat remains perfectly functional, as if maintained by unseen hands or preserved by the very darkness that permeates this place. When activated by the playing of Zelda's lullaby, itself a telling requirement, the ferry moves with unnatural smoothness across waters that should have long since stagnated, but instead flow with perpetual motion, black and depthless as the void between stars. The journey across this subterranean river deliberately evokes the mythological crossing of the Styx, that boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. But where the Greek tradition speaks of a one-way journey, this ferry travels back and forth endlessly, suggesting a more disturbing purpose. Perhaps prisoners were ferried across to face their judgment, then brought back for more torture if they survived. Or perhaps the ferry carried the Shaika themselves, moving between the mundane world above and this realm of sanctioned atrocity below. Throughout the temple, the instruments of torture and execution stand as monuments to calculated cruelty. The guillotines are perhaps the most immediately recognizable. Massive blades suspended in elaborate mechanisms, some still stained with substances best left unidentified. But these aren't simple execution devices. They're integrated into the temple's architecture as functional elements. Some guard passages, others are triggered by pressure plates, and still others seem to activate according to patterns known only to their long-dead creators. The rotating scythes present a different kind of horror. Mounted on elaborate mechanical systems that still function after untold years, these blades sweep through corridors and chambers in predetermined patterns. The engineering required to create such devices, the gears, counterweights, and timing mechanisms, speaks to a level of technical sophistication that makes their purpose all the more chilling. These weren't crude implements of barbarism, but carefully designed machines of death, each one a testament to the resources and intelligence devoted to perfecting the art of causing pain. Falling platforms add another dimension to the temple's deadly architecture. Covered in spikes that remain sharp despite the passage of time, these traps combine psychological and physical torture. The victim would see their fate approaching as the platform gave way, experience the terror of the fall, then face the agony of impalement. Some platforms reset after activation, suggesting they were meant to be used repeatedly, perhaps forcing prisoners to watch others fall before taking their own fatal step. The prison cells scattered throughout the temple vary in design, but share common elements of deliberate dehumanization. Some are barely large enough for a person to stand, forcing occupants into cramped positions that would become agony over time. Others are spacious but feature architecture designed to break the spirit, floors that slope at uncomfortable angles, walls that lean inward oppressively, ceilings that drip with unidentifiable moisture. Many cells contain remains, some still shackled to walls, their positions suggesting they died reaching toward doors that would never open. Most disturbing are the rooms constructed from human remains, walls of skulls arranged in deliberate patterns, floors of compressed bone, ceilings ribbed with what can only be femurs and tibias. These aren't haphazard charnel houses, but carefully designed spaces where death itself becomes architecture. The amount of remains required to construct such rooms speaks to either massive simultaneous executions or generations of accumulated death. Either possibility paints a picture of systematic killing on a scale that official histories have completely omitted. The bloodstains throughout the temple tell their own stories. Some are ancient, brown-black patches absorbed so deeply into the stone that they've become part of it. Others seem fresher, though still old by any reasonable measure, suggesting that the temple's bloody work continued long after it should have been abandoned. The patterns of these stains, spray patterns on walls, pooling marks on floors, handprints on doors, create a forensic record of violence that no amount of historical revision can completely erase. The massive central chamber represents the temple's dark heart, a vast space where multiple levels of walkways and platforms create a three-dimensional maze of potential death. Here, the temple's various elements combine into something greater than their individual horrors. Invisible platforms, accessible only through the lens of truth, create paths over bottomless pits. Walls conceal spinning blades that activate without warning. The very air seems thick with malice, making each breath a reminder that this place was designed to be antithetical to life itself. The inhabitants of this central chamber have evolved to match their environment. Re-deads shamble across platforms, their screams paralyzing victims with primordial fear. Gibdos patrol corridors, their bandaged forms suggesting mummification practices that may have been performed on still living victims. Stalfos warriors guard key passages, their presence indicating that even the temple's defenders have been transformed by the darkness they were meant to contain. Hidden passages revealed only by the lens of truth create a secondary architecture within the temple, a shadow structure within the shadow temple. These secret ways might have served multiple purposes, allowing Sheikah operatives to move unseen, providing escape routes for torturers if prisoners somehow broke free, or creating additional layers of psychological torture as prisoners could never be certain they were truly alone. The fact that these passages require the lens of truth to navigate suggests they were intended only for those initiated into the Sheikah's deepest secrets. The connection to the river Styx becomes more explicit in the temple's lower levels, where the sound of flowing water can be heard but never seen. This auditory torture, the promise of water to parched prisoners who could hear but never reach it, represents the kind of sophisticated cruelty that permeates the temple's design. Every element was chosen not just to kill, but to break the will, to reduce proud enemies of the crown to begging shadows of their former selves. As one descends deeper into the temple, the architecture itself begins to feel alive, responsive to the presence of intruders. Walls seem to close in when not directly observed. Distances between rooms change subtly between visits, and the echoes of footsteps sometimes return as screams. Whether this is the result of deliberate enchantment, the accumulated psychic residue of centuries of torture, or simply the paranoid imagination of those who venture into such darkness, remains an open question. The temple's architecture ultimately reveals itself as a machine designed for a specific purpose, the complete destruction of those deemed enemies of Hyrule's crown. Every corridor, every chamber, every trap was positioned with careful intent. This wasn't a place of random cruelty, but systematic oppression, where the kingdom's dark work was performed with the same careful attention to detail that built the Temple of Time or laid out Castletown's streets. In its own terrible way, the Shadow Temple stands as perhaps the most honest expression of power in all of Hyrule, a place where authority's true face was revealed, unmasked by pretty words or noble justifications, showing itself as what it ultimately is, the ability to inflict suffering on those who cannot resist. Before the Shadow Temple became a monument to suffering, before its chambers echoed with screams and its walls ran with blood, it served a purpose that the royal family has desperately tried to erase from memory. The evidence remains, carved into stone and embedded in ritual, telling a story of sacred ceremonies and final journeys that reveals the temple's original nature as something far different from the torture chamber it would become. The ferry that crosses the temple's subterranean river was never meant to carry prisoners to their doom. Its original purpose was far more solemn, more sacred. This was a funeral barge designed to bear the bodies of Hyrule's royal dead on their final journey into the afterlife. The elaborate carvings that decorate its hull, when examined without the lens of horror that now pervades this place, reveal themselves as protective symbols meant to guard the deceased on their passage between worlds. Consider the requirement that Zelda's lullaby must be played to activate the ferry. This song, passed down through generations of Hyrule's royal line, taught only to those of royal blood or their most trusted servants, wouldn't be used to activate a simple torture device. No, this musical key indicates that the ferry was meant exclusively for royal use, a sacred vessel that would respond only to those with the authority of the crown. The song itself, a lullaby, suggests the ferry's role in providing eternal rest, singing the royal dead to their final sleep. The Sheikah, as the royal family's most devoted servants, would have been the natural custodians of such ceremonies. Their role extended beyond mere protection of the living royals to encompass the safeguarding of royal souls in death. In many ancient cultures, the transition from life to death was considered the most vulnerable moment for a soul, when malevolent forces might interfere with the journey to the afterlife. The Sheikah's unique abilities, their mastery of shadow, their knowledge of ancient rites, their capacity to see the unseen, made them ideally suited to guide and protect the royal dead through this dangerous passage. The temple's location behind Kakariko's graveyard takes on new significance in this light. This wasn't coincidence, but careful planning, creating a direct path from the cemetery where bodies were prepared to the temple where final rites were performed. The elevated platform, the sealed entrance, the separation from the common graves, all of this speaks to the exclusive nature of what occurred within. Only the most important dead would be brought here, only those whose position demanded the full ceremony of royal passage. The Triforce crest embedded in the ferry's deck provides perhaps the strongest evidence of the vessel's sacred purpose. This symbol, the most holy mark in all of Hyrule, wouldn't be placed on an instrument of torture. Its presence indicates that the ferry was consecrated, blessed by the goddesses themselves, designed to carry souls worthy of divine attention. The placement on the deck, where the body would rest during transport, suggests the Triforce was meant to sanctify the deceased, marking them as under divine protection during their journey. But why such elaborate precautions for the royal dead? The answer lies in understanding the unique dangers faced by powerful souls after death. In Hyrulean cosmology, those who wielded great power in life, especially those who held pieces of the Triforce or ruled through divine mandate, didn't simply fade away at death. Their souls retained power, influence, and most dangerously, the capacity to return. Without proper rites, a dead king might become something far worse than any living tyrant, a vengeful spirit with royal authority and supernatural power. The Sheikah understood this danger intimately. Their funeral rites weren't just ceremonies of respect, but necessary precautions against the return of the powerful dead. Every element of the ritual served a dual purpose, honoring the deceased while ensuring they remained deceased. The ferry's journey across the dark water symbolically severed the soul's connection to the world of the living. The playing of Zelda's lullaby soothed the spirit into accepting its death. The passage through the temple's chambers, each representing a different stage of separation from life, gradually prepared the soul for its final rest. This interpretation reframes the temple's architecture entirely. Those chambers that now house instruments of torture originally served as stations of ritual purification. The room where guillotines now fall might have been where the body was ritually washed. The platforms that now collapse into spikes could have been where offerings were placed. The hidden passages, visible only through the lens of truth, might have been ritual paths, representing the invisible journey of the soul that only the Sheikah could perceive and guide. The transformation from sacred space to torture chamber wouldn't have happened suddenly. More likely, it was a gradual corruption that began with small compromises and ended in complete desecration. Perhaps it started during the Hyrulean Civil War, that conflict mentioned only in passing, but whose shadows stretch across the kingdom's history. In times of war, expedient solutions often override sacred traditions. A chamber meant for ritual purification might be repurposed for interrogation, just temporarily, just until the crisis passes. But temporary measures have a way of becoming permanent, especially when they prove effective. The Sheikah, already accustomed to operating in morally ambiguous spaces, might have found it easier than others to justify this transformation. After all, they might have reasoned, protecting the kingdom from its enemies was just another form of serving the royal family. If the same chambers that once prepared royal souls for paradise could be used to extract information from traitors, wasn't that simply expanding their sacred duty? The royal family's complicity in this transformation cannot be ignored. They would have known what the temple's original purpose was. Their own ancestors had been carried through its chambers. The decision to allow, or more likely order, its conversion into a torture facility represents a betrayal of their own dead, a desecration of their own sacred traditions. This might explain why the temple's existence became such a closely guarded secret. It wasn't just the torture they were hiding, but the sacrilege, the admission that they had turned their ancestors' holy ground into a slaughterhouse. The implications ripple outward, touching every aspect of the temple's current state. The undead that now inhabit its chambers, the Redeeds, Gibdos, and Stalfos, might not be random monsters, but the corrupted remains of those who were meant to be laid to rest here. Denied proper burial rites, tortured in the very spaces meant for sacred ceremony, these souls became trapped between life and death, transformed into the vengeful spirits the original rituals were designed to prevent. Even the green liquid that pools in the temple's lower chambers takes on new meaning in this context. Rather than being a substance of pure evil, it might be the corrupted remains of sacred oils and waters once used in funeral preparations. These liquids, blessed and consecrated for the purpose of preparing royal bodies for eternal rest, have been polluted by decades of blood and suffering, transformed from agents of purification into sources of contamination that spread undeath wherever they flow. The presence of ancient Sheikah magic throughout the temple suggests that some elements of the original ceremonies remain active, twisted though they may be. The barriers that require the lens of truth to pass might have been protective wards, meant to ensure only properly prepared souls could progress to the afterlife. Now they serve as obstacles to the living, trapping both prisoners and intruders in a maze of invisible walls and hidden dangers. This understanding casts the Sheikah's role in a particularly tragic light. Bound by sacred oaths to serve the royal family, they were forced to participate in the desecration of their own most holy site. Every torture they performed, every execution they carried out, was conducted in spaces they had once maintained as sacred. The psychological toll of this must have been immense, contributing perhaps to the Sheikah's eventual decline and near disappearance from Hyrule's history. The question of when this transformation occurred remains contentious. Some evidence suggests it happened gradually over generations, each ruler pushing the boundaries a little further until the original purpose was completely forgotten. Other signs point to a specific moment of crisis, perhaps during the Civil War, when desperate times were used to justify desperate measures. The truth likely combines both theories. A sudden decision to repurpose the temple during wartime, followed by a gradual normalization of its use as a torture facility until its original purpose was deliberately obscured. The consequences of this desecration extend beyond the temple itself. By corrupting their own funeral rites, the royal family may have cursed themselves and their kingdom. The proper flow of souls from life to death was disrupted, creating a spiritual imbalance that manifests in the various undead plagues that periodically sweep across Hyrule. Every Poe that haunts the fields, every redeed that shambles through ruins, might be a consequence of the Shadow Temple's corruption, a reminder that some violations of the sacred create wounds that never heal. As we consider what the Shadow Temple once was versus what it became, we see a pattern that repeats throughout Hyrule's history. The corruption of the sacred for temporary gain, followed by attempts to hide the evidence of that corruption. The temple stands as a warning about the price of abandoning principles for power, showing how even the most sacred spaces can be transformed into monuments to cruelty when those in authority decide that ends justify means. The royal family's dark decisions didn't just create a torture chamber. They destroyed a vital link between the living and the dead, breaking the very ceremonies meant to maintain cosmic balance and ensure the peaceful transition of souls. In trying to protect their earthly power through violence and fear, they sacrificed their spiritual authority, transforming what should have been their most sacred trust into their most shameful secret. In the darkest depths of the Shadow Temple, something stirs that should not exist. A creature born from Hyrule's greatest shame, a monster that embodies centuries of suffering compressed into a single, terrible form. Bongo Bongo, the shadow beast that haunts these cursed chambers, represents more than just another boss for the hero of time to overcome. This entity is the physical manifestation of the temple's dark history, a being whose very existence tells the story of what happens when systematic cruelty reaches a critical mass and takes on a life of its own. The creature's emergence from the well marks a moment when the barriers between past and present catastrophically fail. For years, perhaps decades, Bongo Bongo had been contained beneath Kakariko Village, sealed by Impa's power in what the villagers believed was just an ordinary well. But nothing about this containment was ordinary. The choice to imprison such a powerful entity directly beneath a populated area speaks to either desperate circumstances or a deliberate decision to use the village's life force as part of the seal itself, the daily activities of innocent people unknowingly reinforcing the barriers that kept this nightmare at bay. When Bongo Bongo finally breaks free, the manner of its escape reveals much about its nature. This isn't a creature that simply smashes through barriers with brute force. Instead, it seems to seep upward like a dark mist, corrupting and weakening the seal from within until it simply dissolves. Witnesses describe not an explosion, but an implosion, the well collapsing inward before a shadow erupts skyward, bringing with it the stench of centuries-old death and the sound of countless voices screaming in unison. Impa's attempts to reseal the creature, first at the well and then in the temple, follow a pattern that suggests deep familiarity with this entity. She knows exactly where it will go, how it will behave, what measures might contain it. This isn't the response of someone encountering an unknown threat, but rather someone dealing with a familiar enemy, perhaps one whose creation she witnessed or even participated in. The speed with which she moves to the Shadow Temple after the well's seal breaks indicates she always knew this day might come. The 7-year period during Link's slumber proves crucial to understanding Bongo Bongo's development. During this time, Ganondorf's power spreads across Hyrule like a plague, seeping into every sacred space and corrupting what it touches. The Shadow Temple, already a place of concentrated darkness, would have been particularly susceptible to this influence. What might have been a manageable evil, contained and controlled, transforms under Ganondorf's touch into something far more powerful and malevolent. Yet the evidence suggests Bongo Bongo existed before Ganondorf's rise to power, making the Gerudo King more of a catalyst than creator. The theories surrounding the creature's origin each reveal different aspects of Hyrule's dark history, painting a picture of a kingdom built on foundations of violence that inevitably produced this monstrous offspring. The most compelling theory positions Bongo Bongo not as an individual entity, but as an amalgamation, the accumulated souls of everyone who died in the Shadow Temple's torture chambers, fused together by their shared agony and hatred. This would explain the creature's bizarre form, a massive, disembodied head with separate hands, as if multiple beings were trying to manifest simultaneously but could only partially materialize. The single eye that dominates its face might represent the collective vision of all those souls forced to watch each other's suffering and now seeing the world through a lens of pure vengeance. Consider the mechanics of how such an entity might form. In Japanese folklore, the concept of onryo, vengeful spirits, is well established. These spirits are created when someone dies with such intense emotion that their soul cannot pass on, remaining in the physical world to seek revenge. Now imagine not one such spirit, but hundreds, perhaps thousands, all dying in the same place, all experiencing similar agonies, all crying out for the same justice that never comes. Over time, these individual spirits might begin to merge, their separate identities dissolving into a collective consciousness of pure hatred. The Shadow Temple would have been the perfect incubator for such an entity. The systematic nature of the torture performed there, the mechanical repetition of suffering, would have created a sort of spiritual resonance. Each new victim's screams would harmonize with the echoes of those who came before, building a crescendo of anguish that transcended individual experience. The very stones of the temple, saturated with blood and psychic trauma, would become conductors for this dark energy, channeling and concentrating it until it reached critical mass. The connection to Japanese Yurei folklore becomes even more pronounced when examining Bongo's behavior. Yurei are said to be bound to the physical location of their death or to specific objects connected to their demise. Bongo's initial containment in the well, directly beneath where the temple's victims might have been disposed of, follows this pattern precisely. Even after breaking free, the creature returns to the Shadow Temple, drawn back to the site of its creation like a moth to flame. The creature's physical appearance offers further clues to its nature. The dismembered quality, separate hands and head, could represent the literal dismemberment of prisoners, but it might also symbolize something more abstract. In many torture techniques, the goal is to separate the victim's sense of self, to break down their identity until only pain remains. Bongo's fragmented form might be the physical manifestation of this psychological dismemberment. Countless broken minds trying to reconstitute themselves but unable to remember what wholeness looked like. The single, massive eye dominates the creature's form with disturbing intensity. This eye doesn't merely see, it perceives, judges, and condemns. Some scholars have suggested this represents the collective witness of all who died in the temple, forced to watch each other's suffering, and now forcing the world to witness their pain in return. Others propose it symbolizes the all-seeing eye of the surveillance state that the Sheikah represented, turned back upon the kingdom that employed such methods. There's another theory, less popular but equally disturbing, that suggests Bongo was once a specific individual, perhaps even the man who could see the truth mentioned in village folklore. This person, possessing the ability to see through illusions and deceptions, might have discovered something about the royal family or the Sheikah that warranted his elimination. But someone with the power to see truth cannot be easily destroyed. Even in death, that penetrating vision persisted, transformed by torture and hatred into something monstrous. The evidence for this theory rests partly on the lens of truth's essential role in defeating Bongo. The creature can become invisible, disappearing from normal sight, but the lens reveals it, suggesting a connection between the artifact and the entity. If the man who could see the truth created or possessed the lens, his transformation into Bongo might explain why his own creation becomes the key to his destruction. It's a poetic irony that appeals to those who see patterns of justice in Hyrule's mythology. Yet this individual origin theory fails to account for Bongo's scale and power. One person, no matter how wronged, seems insufficient to generate such concentrated malevolence. More likely, if there's truth to the connection with the man who could see the truth, he might have been simply the first or most powerful soul in the amalgamation, a sort of seed crystal around which other tortured spirits accumulated. The transformation process itself deserves consideration. How does suffering become substance? How does emotion manifest as entity? The answer might lie in the unique properties of the Shadow Temple itself. Built to channel and contain dark energy, the temple's architecture might have acted as a sort of spiritual centrifuge, spinning disparate souls together until they formed something new. The ritual magics meant to guide royal souls to the afterlife, corrupted and reversed, could have trapped ordinary souls in an endless cycle of death and undeath. The green liquid found in the temple's depths provides another piece of the puzzle. This substance, which appears to animate the dead and corrupt the living, might be the physical medium through which spiritual energy becomes tangible. As bodies decomposed in the temple's chambers, their physical remains might have mingled with the concentrated psychic residue of their suffering, creating a substance that exists partially in both the material and spiritual realms. Bongo Bongo, emerging from or perhaps composed of this substance, would thus be neither fully physical nor fully spiritual, a liminal being capable of interacting with both realms. The creature's name itself offers clues that most overlook. Bongo Bongo seems almost childish, rhythmic like a heartbeat or drum, but drums have deep significance in many cultures as instruments that bridge the physical and spiritual worlds. The sound of drumming is said to induce trance states, to call spirits, to mark the boundary between life and death. Bongo Bongo's attacks often involve percussion-like strikes, its massive hands beating out rhythms of destruction. Perhaps the entity's name reflects its nature as a being that exists at the boundary between worlds, beating out the rhythm of death that echoes through the temple's chambers. During Link's 7-year slumber, Ganondorf's influence would have accelerated Bongo Bongo's development. The Gerudo King's dark power, flowing through the temples of Hyrule, would have fed the creature like fuel poured on embers. What might have remained a dormant mass of spiritual pollution became an active, malevolent force. The seal that had contained it for years began to crack under pressure from within as the entity grew stronger, fed by the ambient evil that Ganondorf's reign produced. The implications of Bongo Bongo's existence extend far beyond the immediate threat it poses. If such entities can form from concentrated suffering, how many other potential Bongo Bongos exist throughout Hyrule? Every battlefield, every prison, every site of mass death might harbor the seeds of similar creatures. The Shadow Temple's unique properties might have accelerated or concentrated the process, but the underlying mechanism, suffering becoming substance, emotion becoming entity, could function anywhere sufficient trauma accumulates. This realization casts the royal family's desperate attempts to hide the Shadow Temple's existence in a new light. They weren't just covering up past atrocities. They were trying to prevent the spread of knowledge about what those atrocities had created. If the people of Hyrule knew that their government's actions had literally created monsters, that systematic torture had given birth to entities of pure vengeance, the kingdom's stability would shatter overnight. Better to let people think Bongo Bongo was just another monster, just another challenge for heroes to overcome, than to admit it was the inevitable consequence of institutional cruelty. Among all the artifacts scattered throughout Hyrule's long history, few carry as much significance or mystery as the lens of truth. This unassuming object, resembling a magnifying glass adorned with the Sheikah eye symbol, represents something far more profound than a simple magical tool. It embodies the intersection of power and knowledge, the price of shortcuts to enlightenment, and the dangerous truth that some things hidden should perhaps remain unseen. The lens of truth's creation story remains frustratingly obscured, wrapped in the same veils of secrecy that shroud much of Sheikah history. What we know comes from fragments, village folklore, ancient inscriptions, and the testament of the artifact itself. The lens wasn't discovered or gifted by divine providence. It was crafted deliberately and with specific intent to grant ordinary beings a power that should have required years of spiritual discipline to achieve. The Sheikah people possessed the gift of sight beyond sight, their third eye allowing them to perceive truth where others saw only illusion. This ability wasn't merely physical but spiritual, requiring a fundamental understanding of reality's hidden layers. Training a Sheikah child to fully utilize this gift took decades of meditation, practice, and gradual awakening. The mind's eye, as they called it, had to be carefully cultivated like a delicate plant, nurtured through discipline and wisdom until it bloomed into true sight. But someone, perhaps a Sheikah, perhaps an outsider who had learned their secrets, decided that this careful process could be circumvented. The lens of truth represents technological ambition applied to spiritual matters, an attempt to mechanize enlightenment. Through craftsmanship that merged metallurgy with magic, crystal working with consciousness manipulation, this unknown artificer created a tool that could grant instant access to perceptions that should have taken a lifetime to develop. The implications of such a creation would have been immediately controversial within Sheikah society. Their entire cultural identity rested partly on their unique abilities, their role as those who could see what others couldn't. The lens of truth democratized this power, potentially making any common soldier or merchant capable of penetrating illusions that the Sheikah had used to maintain their mystery and authority. Some within the tribe would have seen this as dangerous dilution of their heritage. Others might have viewed it as necessary evolution. The previous owner of the lens, the man who could see the truth referenced in village stories, presents a fascinating puzzle. His house once stood where the well now exists, directly above what would become Bongo Bongo's prison. This placement seems too deliberate to be coincidence. Perhaps he positioned himself there intentionally, using the lens to monitor something beneath the ground, keeping watch over secrets that the village above never suspected. The description of this man varies depending on who tells the story. Some say he was a Sheikah who had broken from tradition, sharing secrets that should have remained hidden. Others claim he was an outsider who had somehow acquired or created the lens, using it to peer into matters that didn't concern him. Still others suggest he was a scholar, someone who believed knowledge should be free to all, rather than hoarded by the elite. Each version of the story carries its own implications about why his house was destroyed and replaced with a well. The connection between the lens and the Shadow Temple runs deeper than mere utility. Throughout the temple, invisible platforms, hidden doors, and concealed passages await revelation through the lens's power. But this raises a disturbing question. Why would the Sheikah build their own temple with defenses that their natural sight could penetrate, but that would require the lens for others? The answer might be that they didn't, that these invisible elements were added later, either as additional security or as part of the temple's transformation into a torture facility. Consider the psychological impact of using the lens within the Shadow Temple. Each revelation brings not enlightenment, but horror. Hidden platforms span over pits filled with the dead. Invisible walls reveal messages written in blood. Concealed passages lead to chambers where unspeakable acts occurred. The truth that the lens reveals in this place isn't liberating. It's crushing, overwhelming, the kind of truth that makes one wish for the comfort of ignorance. Training the mind's eye, as the Sheikah traditionally did, involved more than just developing perception. It required developing the mental fortitude to handle what would be seen. The gradual nature of the training allowed practitioners to slowly build their capacity to witness truth without being destroyed by it. The lens of truth offers no such preparation. It grants the sight, but not the wisdom to process it, the ability to see, but not the strength to endure what's seen. This disconnect between power and preparation might explain the fate of the lens's previous owner. If he used it to peer too deeply into the Shadow Temple's secrets, to witness truths that even trained Sheikah approached with caution, the psychological damage could have been severe. Some versions of his story mention madness, a gradual deterioration that began when he started seeing things others couldn't verify. Was this genuine insanity, or was he simply seeing truths that others refused to acknowledge? The lens itself bears examination as an object. The crystal at its center isn't ordinary glass, but something that seems to exist partially outside normal space. When looking through it, one doesn't simply see hidden things. Reality itself appears to shift, showing layers of existence that overlap and interact in ways that challenge conventional understanding. The purple tinge that colors everything, viewed through the lens, might represent the filter necessary to make these visions bearable to mortal minds, reducing infinite complexity to something comprehensible. The Sheikah eye symbol emblazoned on the lens's frame serves multiple purposes. Obviously, it identifies the artifact's cultural origin, marking it as Sheikah technology. But the symbol might also function as a focusing element, channeling the user's perception through symbolic representation of the third eye. Some scholars suggest the symbol actually protects the user, limiting what the lens reveals to prevent the kind of total revelation that would shatter an unprepared mind. The relationship between the lens and other Sheikah artifacts reveals a pattern of technological development. The mask of truth, which allows communication with animals and gossip stones, represents a different aspect of enhanced perception, understanding rather than seeing. The Sheikah slate from ancient legends speaks of capturing and preserving truth. Together, these artifacts suggest a systematic attempt to externalize Sheikah abilities, creating tools that could preserve their cultural advantages even as their population declined. Hidden platforms throughout the Shadow Temple take on new meaning when considered through this framework. They weren't just obstacles, but tests, challenges that could only be overcome by those who possessed either natural Sheikah sight or the artificial sight granted by the lens. This created a filtering mechanism, ensuring that only those deemed worthy could access the temple's deepest secrets. But worthy by whose standards? And for what purpose? The desert connection provides another layer to the mystery. The Gerudo speak of needing the eye of truth to cross the haunted wasteland, following a phantom guide that only those with enhanced perception can see. This suggests the lens of truth, or similar artifacts, had significance beyond Sheikah culture. Perhaps trade routes once existed between the Sheikah and Gerudo, exchanges of knowledge and technology that official histories have forgotten or suppressed. The Phantom Guide itself raises questions. If it's a Sheikah spirit, as some suggest, why does it help travelers cross the desert? Is it bound by ancient obligations, fulfilling duties that extend beyond death? Or is something else entirely, an entity that exists in the spaces between visible and invisible, using travelers for purposes they don't understand? The lens reveals the guide but not its motivations, showing truth incompletely, perhaps dangerously so. Using the lens requires more than simply looking through it. The artifact demands conscious activation, a deliberate choice to see what's hidden. This requirement might be a safety mechanism, preventing accidental revelations that could endanger the unprepared. But it also means that every truth revealed through the lens is sought deliberately. The user bears responsibility for what they discover. The physical toll of extended lens use is rarely discussed but consistently reported. Users describe headaches that start behind the eyes and spread throughout the skull. Some mention a persistent feeling of disconnection, as if reality itself becomes less solid after seeing its hidden layers. The 7 years Link spent in magical slumber might have been partially necessary to recover from the psychic strain of using the lens throughout the Shadow Temple. There's evidence suggesting multiple lenses of truth might have existed. The phrasing in ancient texts sometimes uses plurals, speaking of lenses rather than the lens. If true, what happened to the others? Were they destroyed to prevent their power from spreading? Hidden away in vaults that haven't yet been discovered? Or did they suffer some fate that made the surviving lens the last of its kind? The question of whether the lens shows truth or simply another layer of reality remains philosophically complex. When invisible platforms appear through the lens, were they always there, merely hidden? Or does the lens somehow create what it reveals, imposing its version of truth on reality? The distinction matters because it determines whether the lens is a tool of discovery or creation, whether it reveals the world as it is or shapes it according to Sheikah design. In Bongo Bongo's boss chamber, the lens becomes essential not just for navigation, but for survival. The creature's ability to become invisible suggests it exists partially in the same hidden realm that the lens reveals. The battle becomes a contest between different types of vision. Bongo Bongo's supernatural sight against the artificial sight granted by the lens. That the lens proves superior might indicate it was specifically designed to counter such entities, created with knowledge of what darkness might eventually birth. The tragedy of the lens of truth is that it grants power without understanding, sight without wisdom, revelation without context. It shows what is hidden but not why it was hidden, reveals secrets but not their significance. In the Shadow Temple, this limitation becomes horrifyingly clear. The lens shows the instruments of torture, but not the justifications used to employ them, reveals the paths through the temple, but not the destination they ultimately lead to. It's a perfect metaphor for knowledge obtained without effort, powerful, useful, but ultimately incomplete and potentially dangerous to those who wield it unprepared. Descend beneath Kakariko Village's well, and you enter a space that should not exist, a dark mirror of the Shadow Temple that lurks beneath the very feet of innocent villagers who draw their water unaware of what lies below. This mini-dungeon, as some dismissively call it, represents something far more significant than a mere prelude to the greater temple. It's a wound that refuses to heal, a secret basement to horror that reveals just how deeply the darkness runs beneath Hyrule's seemingly peaceful surface. The parallels between the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple strike even casual observers as too precise to be coincidental. The same sinister paintings watch from the walls, their eyes following visitors with malevolent intelligence. The same prison cells line corrupted corridors, their bars still strong despite years of apparent abandonment. The same grotesque architecture of death permeates both spaces, as if one location served as blueprint for the other, or perhaps both were constructed simultaneously, two parts of a single, terrible whole. Dead Hand, that nightmare of flesh and grasping appendages, appears in both locations and nowhere else in Hyrule. This exclusivity cannot be chance. The creature, with its pale, bloated body and infinite reaching hands, seems specifically designed for these spaces, or perhaps these spaces were designed for it. Some theorists suggest Dead Hand isn't multiple creatures, but a single entity that moves between the well and temple through passages that exist outside normal space, appearing wherever intruders venture too deep into secrets better left buried. The basement theory gains credibility when one considers the well's position directly above what would have been the man who could see the truth's former dwelling. If his house contained a basement or cellar, the space beneath the well might be that very same chamber, preserved and expanded over the years into something far more sinister. The lens of truth, found in this exact location, supports this connection, hidden in what was once perhaps a private study or workshop, a place where forbidden knowledge was pursued away from prying eyes. But the green liquid that pools in the well's lowest chambers tells a different story, one of connection and contamination that runs deeper than simple architecture. This substance, thick and luminescent with its own sickly light, doesn't behave like normal liquid. It flows upward when it should flow down, pools in corners that should drain, and most disturbingly, seems to pulse with a rhythm eerily similar to a heartbeat. The same substance appears in the Shadow Temple's boss chamber, creating a circulatory system of corruption between the two locations. The liquid's properties defy conventional understanding. It's neither purely physical nor entirely spiritual, existing in a state that alchemists would call impossible. When the rare, unfortunate falls into these pools, they don't simply drown. They're transformed, their flesh taking on the same greenish tinge, their eyes clouding with an intelligence that isn't their own. Some emerge as redeeds, others as Gibdos, and still others simply disappear, absorbed into the liquid itself to add their essence to its ever-growing consciousness. From these pools rise endless hands, reaching upward with desperate grasping motions that speak to an intelligence behind their movement. These aren't random spawns, but coordinated attempts to drag the living down into the depths. Each hand that emerges seems to know exactly where to reach, anticipating movements with uncanny precision. Some witnesses swear they recognize specific gestures in these grasping motions, the pleading reach of someone they once knew, the desperate clawing of a neighbor who disappeared years ago. The reanimation properties of this substance exceed anything found in natural necromancy. Bodies submerged in it don't simply rise as undead. They're improved, enhanced, transformed into something more dangerous than they were in life. The process seems selective, choosing certain corpses while leaving others to dissolve completely into the liquid's mass. This selection process suggests not random animation, but deliberate recruitment, as if the substance itself is building an army for purposes that remain mercifully unclear. Water flowing through these corpse-tainted chambers raises horrifying questions about Kakariko's water supply. The well serves the entire village, providing what residents believe is clean, pure water drawn from underground springs. But if that water passes through or near these chambers of death, what exactly are the villagers drinking? The fact that they remain seemingly healthy suggests either remarkable filtration or, more disturbingly, that long-term exposure to diluted amounts of this corruption has effects too subtle to immediately notice. The secret passages between the well and the Shadow Temple remain partially unexplored, even by those brave enough to venture into both locations. Walls that appear solid reveal hollow spaces when tapped correctly. Floors that seem stable hide tunnels that lead into darkness. The geography doesn't match conventional mapping, distances that should be impossible given the surface landmarks above. Somehow compress or extend based on rules that follow dream logic rather than physical law. These passages might have served multiple purposes during the temple's active period. Guards could move unseen between locations, transferring prisoners from the well's holding cells to the temple's torture chambers without ever appearing on the surface. Bodies could be disposed of efficiently, dropped down shafts that connected directly to the corruption pools below. The living and dead could be sorted and processed with mechanical efficiency, all hidden beneath the innocent facade of a simple village well. The impromptu prison theory suggests that when Bongo Bongo first manifested or grew too powerful to contain within the temple, the well became an emergency containment facility. Its proximity to the village might have been intentional, using the life force of the inhabitants above as an unconscious seal, their daily activities creating patterns of positive energy that helped suppress the darkness below. Every child's laugh, every act of kindness, every moment of simple human joy served as another bar in the cage, holding back ancient evil. But prisons, even impromptu ones, require maintenance. The seals and wards that kept Bongo Bongo contained would have needed regular reinforcement, rituals performed to strengthen barriers between worlds. Who performed these rituals after the Sheikah declined? Did Impa alone bear this burden, descending into the darkness regularly to reinforce seals she knew would eventually fail? The exhaustion such work would cause might explain her apparent aging between Link's childhood and adult years. Not just time, but the spiritual drain of holding back darkness, virtually single-handed. The architectural similarities between the two locations extend beyond mere design to actual construction techniques. The stones used in both show the same tool marks, the same unusual joining methods that leave no visible mortar, yet create bonds stronger than solid rock. Some pieces appear to have been carved in place, shaped from bedrock rather than assembled from separate blocks. This suggests both locations were created by the same hands, or at least the same techniques passed down through specific lineages. More disturbing still are the signs of habitation in the well's depths. Not just the presence of monsters, but evidence that someone, or something, has been living in these chambers. Relatively fresh scratches mark counting systems on cell walls. Arranged bones form patterns too deliberate to be random. In one chamber, corroded metal tools lie arranged as if someone were interrupted mid-task and might return at any moment to complete their work. The possibility that the Shadow Temple's corruption has been slowly spreading through underground channels cannot be ignored. The well might represent just one tendril of a vast network of contamination spreading beneath Hyrule's surface. Other wells, other basements, other forgotten chambers might all connect to this same source of corruption, creating a vast circulatory system of evil that touches places no one suspects. Every village that draws groundwater, every castle with deep foundations, Every temple with underground chambers might be unknowingly connected to this network of shadow. The green liquid's flow patterns suggest it moves with purpose rather than following simple gravity. It seeks specific locations, avoids others, and sometimes flows uphill to reach destinations that seem chosen rather than natural. If this substance carries some form of consciousness, as evidence suggests, then its spread throughout the underground represents not just contamination, but colonization, an intelligent evil deliberately expanding its influence through Hyrule's hidden spaces. In this context, young Link's ability to enter and survive the well becomes even more remarkable. A child, pure of heart and protected by destiny, ventures into a space that has destroyed grown warriors and experienced Sheikah. Perhaps his innocence served as armor against the corruption, his untainted spirit allowing him to pass through spaces that would trap or transform. Adults whose hearts carried the weight of compromise and sin. Or perhaps the darkness recognized something in him, a future role in its eventual defeat, and chose to let him pass as part of some incomprehensible longer game. The well's transformation from house foundation to water source to prison represents layers of deception, each one hiding the last. Villagers think they know their well, a simple source of water, perhaps with some strange rumors attached, but nothing more. They don't know about the prison beneath. Those who know about the prison don't know about the torture chambers deeper still. And even those who know about the chambers might not understand their connection to the vast network of corruption spreading through Hyrule's underground, a cancer of shadow that the well merely represents the most visible symptom of. The Shadow Temple's inhabitants tell a story written in symbolism and suffering, each statue and creature carefully chosen to create an environment where psychological torture accompanies the physical. These aren't random decorations or arbitrary monsters, but deliberate selections that transform the temple from mere dungeon into a carefully orchestrated nightmare, where every element serves to break the spirit before the body finally fails. The bird-like statues that dominate the temple's architecture present an immediate mystery. Their elongated beaks and pointed ears create profiles that shouldn't exist in nature, hybrid forms that merge avian and canine features into something uniquely disturbing. These figures appear throughout both the Shadow Temple and the well beneath Kakariko, always positioned at crucial junctions, watching over torture chambers, flanking doorways to cells, perched above corridors where prisoners would have been marched to their doom. The connection to Anubis, the Egyptian guide of the dead, seems deliberate despite the cultural displacement. Anubis, with his jackal head and human body, served as psychopomp, one who guides souls from the world of the living to the realm of the dead. These bird statues might serve a similar function, their presence marking boundaries between life and death, sanity and madness, hope and despair. But where Anubis offered judgment and potential redemption, these figures promise only witness to suffering. The anthropomorphic quality of these statues suggests they might represent actual beings rather than purely symbolic figures. Some theorists propose they depict an ancient race that predated both Hylians and Sheikah, entities that taught the early peoples of Hyrule the arts of death and judgment. Others suggest they're stylized representations of the Sheikah themselves, their features deliberately distorted to inspire fear and strip them of humanity when performing their darkest duties. Most disturbing is how these statues seem to watch and listen. Prisoners would have spent their final hours under these unblinking gazes, unable to escape the feeling of being observed even in solitude. The psychological impact of such constant surveillance, never knowing if the statues were mere stone or something more, would have been devastating. Some accounts speak of prisoners who insisted the statues moved when not directly observed, claims dismissed as madness, but perhaps containing grains of horrible truth. The rat figures scattered throughout the temple's largest chambers serve a different but equally deliberate purpose. Rats, in cultural symbolism, represent decay, disease, and corruption, all elements present in abundance within the temple. But they also symbolize survival against odds, creatures that thrive in conditions that would kill others. Their presence here might represent the temple's dual nature, a place of death that somehow generates its own terrible form of life. These rat statues often appear in groups, carved in poses of movement, as if frozen mid-scurry. The craftsmanship reveals disturbing attention to detail. Individual whiskers, tiny claws, eyes that seem to track movement, despite being carved from stone. Some appear to be gnawing on objects better left unidentified. Others seem to be emerging from or disappearing into walls, creating an impression that the very architecture is infested with their presence. The positioning of rat statues near torture devices suggests their symbolic role in the temple's function. Rats are creatures that clean up aftermath, consuming what others leave behind. In a temple where death was industrialized, the rat imagery might represent the necessary disposal of evidence, the creatures that ensured no trace remained of what occurred in these chambers. They're monuments to erasure, celebrating the destruction of evidence that might have condemned those responsible for the temple's atrocities. But the most enigmatic inhabitants of the temple are the mysterious talking paintings, those disturbing portraits that speak when approached and offer cryptic guidance to those brave or foolish enough to listen. Each painting depicts the same figure, or perhaps different aspects of the same entity, with features that shift between mocking and menacing depending on viewing angle. The prominent third eye on each figure's forehead marks them as connected to the Shaika, but their exact identity remains frustratingly obscure. These paintings demonstrate awareness that extends beyond simple, programmed responses. They know things they shouldn't, details about the temple's current state, information about visitors, knowledge of events occurring in distant chambers. This suggests they're not simply enchanted artworks, but windows through which something watches, conduits for an intelligence that pervades the temple's entirety. The third eye, prominently displayed on each painting, carries deep significance in Shika mysticism. It represents not just enhanced sight, but transcendent perception, the ability to see past, present, and future simultaneously. If these paintings represent someone who achieved such sight, their presence throughout the temple suggests they're bearing witness to all that occurs within, forced to observe endless cycles of suffering without ability to intervene or escape. Could these paintings depict the man who could see the truth? The evidence is compelling, if inconclusive. Their presence in both the Shadow Temple and the area beneath the well creates a direct connection to his former home's location. Their knowledge of the temple's secrets, their ability to guide visitors through its dangers, their prominent third eye, all point toward someone who knew these spaces intimately, perhaps because they helped design them or died within them. The painting's dual nature, helpful yet sinister, mirrors the temple's own transformation from sacred to profane. They provide genuine assistance to those navigating the temple, offering warnings about traps and hints about hidden passages. Yet their very helpfulness feels like another form of torture, forcing visitors to rely on guidance from entities that clearly delight in the surrounding horror. Every piece of advice comes with implicit acknowledgement of the temple's atrocities, making those who accept help complicit in some small way with what occurred here. Moving through the temple, one encounters the various undead that have made this place their home, or perhaps prison. Redeads shamble through corridors with their distinctive moaning, a sound that paralyzes not through magic, but through pure, primal fear. These creatures, wrapped in their tattered shrouds, might be the remains of prisoners who died in the temple's cells, their bodies reanimated by the concentrated darkness that permeates every stone. The Redead's scream deserves particular attention. It's not simply a vocalization, but a psychic assault that triggers involuntary paralysis in those who hear it. Some researchers suggest this scream contains compressed memories of the creature's deaths, all their final moments of agony, condensed into a single sound that forces listeners to experience that same helpless terror. The paralysis isn't magical, but psychological. The body's complete shutdown when confronted with suffering beyond comprehension. Gibdos patrol deeper sections of the temple, their mummified forms suggesting different preservation methods than the Redeads. Where Redeads seem to be spontaneous reanimation of the recently dead, Gibdos appear to have undergone deliberate mummification processes. The bandages that wrap their bodies show signs of ritual preparation, specific patterns, preserved herbs between layers, symbols drawn in substances better left unidentified. Someone took time and care to prepare these bodies, suggesting their undeath was planned rather than accidental. Stalfos warriors guard crucial passages with mechanical precision that speaks to retained combat training. These skeletal knights weren't common prisoners, but trained warriors who died in the temple's confines. Perhaps they were guards who knew too much, soldiers who questioned orders, or Sheikah warriors who refused to participate in certain activities. Their punishment was not just death, but eternal service, forced to defend the very place they might have tried to expose or escape. The intelligence displayed by these undead varies considerably. Redeads show animal cunning at best. Gibdos demonstrate basic problem-solving, while Stalfos exhibit full tactical awareness. This graduation of consciousness might reflect how they died, those who experienced quick deaths retaining more of themselves than those who endured prolonged torture that shattered their minds before their bodies finally failed. It's a horrible calculus that transforms the temple's undead population into a catalog of different execution methods. Wall statues throughout the temple depict figures in positions of imprisonment and torture. Heads separated from bodies, hands bound or severed, faces frozen in expressions of agony that artists captured with disturbing accuracy. These aren't idealized or stylized representations, but portraits drawn from life, or more accurately, drawn from death. Each statue might memorialize a specific prisoner, transforming their final moments into permanent decoration. The concentration of hatred and malice within the temple hasn't just created individual monsters, but has begun generating entirely new forms of undeath. Creatures emerge from shadow that correspond to no known taxonomy of the undead, amalgamations of multiple corpses fused by dark energy, shadows that gained independent existence after being cast by dying prisoners, echoes of screams that solidified into hostile entities. The temple has become a laboratory for new forms of horror, each generation of monster more adapted to the environment than the last. The symbols and inscriptions carved throughout the chambers add another layer of meaning to the inhabitants' presence. Written in ancient Shaika script, many remain untranslated, their meanings lost with the decline of those who could read them. But those that have been deciphered speak of contracts and obligations that extend beyond death, promises that the guilty will guard their crimes forever, oaths that bind souls to locations regardless of their body's disposition. These inscriptions suggest the temple's inhabitants aren't random victims, but specifically selected individuals chosen to serve particular roles in death. The positioning of certain undead seems too deliberate to be chance. They stand at specific points, patrol particular routes, guard certain chambers with dedication that speaks to compulsion rather than choice. They're not just monsters, but components in a vast mechanism designed to ensure the temple's secrets remain hidden while simultaneously preserving evidence of what occurred within. The temple has become a self-perpetuating ecosystem of horror, where death feeds on itself to create more death. Each new victim adds to the collective malice, their suffering absorbed into the temple's stones, to emerge later as new monstrosities. The inhabitants aren't separate from the architecture, but part of it, mobile extensions of the temple's will to preserve and punish simultaneously. They're antibodies in a diseased system, attacking intruders not out of evil, but from an immune response to anything that might threaten the terrible equilibrium that's been established. As one progresses through the temple, the relationship between its inhabitants becomes clearer. They're not competing entities, but components of a single organism. The temple itself, alive with accumulated malice and using these creatures as its sensory organs and defensive mechanisms. The bird statues are its eyes, the rat figures its ears, the paintings its voice, and the undead its hands, all working in horrible harmony to maintain a monument to atrocities that should have been forgotten, but instead have been preserved in the most twisted way imaginable. The royal family of Hyrule presents itself to the world, draped in golden light, blessed by the goddesses, protectors of the sacred realm and guardians of eternal wisdom. But beneath the ceremonial robes and benevolent smiles lies a legacy written in blood, a systematic program of oppression that transformed sacred spaces into slaughterhouses and turned their most loyal servants into instruments of unforgivable cruelty. The Shadow Temple stands as the most damning evidence of this dark legacy, a monument to what power does when it believes itself beyond judgment. To understand the full scope of the royal family's crimes, we must first understand how they defined enemies of the crown. In the official histories, these enemies are painted as clear threats, would-be usurpers, hostile foreign agents, practitioners of dark magic who threatened the kingdom's stability. But the Shadow Temple's extensive facilities, its industrial approach to suffering, suggests the definition was far broader and more arbitrary than any official record would dare admit. Political dissidents who spoke against royal policies found themselves labeled as enemies. Merchants who refused to pay excessive taxes became threats to economic stability. Scholars who uncovered inconvenient truths about Hyrule's past were branded as spreading sedition. Even children who displayed unusual magical abilities outside the royal family's control could be designated as potential future threats. The definition expanded to encompass anyone who might challenge, question, or merely inconvenience the absolute authority of the throne. The Sheikah, bound by sacred oaths passed down through generations, became the enforcers of this ever-broadening definition of treason. Their training had prepared them to be shadows, to operate in the spaces between legal and illegal, moral and immoral. But the royal family pushed them further, transforming them from protective shadows into instruments of state terror. Every Sheikah who participated in the Shadow Temple's operations faced an impossible choice: break their sacred oaths to the royal family, or break their own souls by participating in atrocities. The methods employed within the Shadow Temple weren't random acts of cruelty, but carefully developed techniques refined over generations. The royal family didn't simply order torture, they sponsored its development as a science. Sheikah researchers were tasked with discovering the exact amount of pain that could be inflicted without causing death, the precise psychological pressures that would break a person's will without destroying their ability to provide information. The temple became a laboratory where suffering was quantified, measured, and optimized. The torture methods revealed by the temple's architecture speak to horrifying creativity. The guillotines weren't simply execution devices, but tools of psychological torture. Prisoners would be forced to watch others die, knowing their turn would come, the anticipation often proving more devastating than the eventual execution. The rotating scythes were positioned to inflict non-fatal wounds on those who tried to escape, creating a choice between certain maiming and remaining in cells where slower tortures awaited. Some chambers show evidence of more sophisticated techniques, rooms where the walls slowly closed in, taking days to finally crush their occupants. Cells with floors that would gradually heat up, forcing prisoners to constantly move until exhaustion made movement impossible. Chains positioned to hold victims in stress positions that would cause excruciating pain over time without leaving visible marks, perfect for prisoners who might eventually be released but needed to be broken first. The distinction between actual threats and perceived enemies blurred until it ceased to exist. A farmer who complained about tax collectors might find himself in the same cell as an actual assassin. A mother who asked too many questions about her disappeared son would share torture chambers with confirmed spies. This deliberate mixing served a purpose. It destroyed any sense of justice or proportionality, teaching all who entered that guilt or innocence mattered less than the simple fact of being designated an enemy by those in power. The execution practices went beyond simple killing to include elaborate rituals of dehumanization. Prisoners weren't just executed, they were erased. Their names were struck from records, their families forbidden to mourn, their very existence denied. Bodies weren't returned for proper burial, but disposed of in ways that ensured no trace remained. Some were burned and their ashes scattered, others dissolved in alchemical solutions. Still others fed to creatures kept specifically for this purpose. But the cover-up of these activities reveals perhaps the deepest truth about the royal family's guilt. They knew what they were doing was wrong. If they truly believed their actions were justified, why hide them? Why seal the temple, destroy records, threaten anyone who spoke of what occurred there. The elaborate efforts at concealment prove consciousness of guilt, an understanding that their subjects would revolt if they knew the full extent of what was being done in their name. The historical revisionism employed by the royal family was as systematic as the torture itself. Court historians were ordered to rewrite records, removing any mention of the Shadow Temple or those who disappeared within it. Maps were redrawn to exclude its location. Entire family lines were edited from genealogies to hide the fact that they had been systematically eliminated. The Sheikah were ordered to destroy their own records, burning centuries of accumulated knowledge to protect the royal family's reputation. When simple denial became impossible, when too many people had lost family members, when the screams from the temple could no longer be explained away, the royal family shifted to more sophisticated propaganda. The disappeared weren't innocent victims, but dangerous criminals whose crimes were too terrible to speak of publicly. The Shadow Temple wasn't a torture chamber, but a necessary evil that protected innocent citizens from threats they couldn't understand. Those who questioned these explanations were themselves labeled as potential threats, creating a self-reinforcing cycle of fear and silence. The decision to seal the temple rather than destroy it reveals the royal family's ultimate hypocrisy. They wanted the Shadow Temple to disappear from public knowledge, but couldn't bring themselves to actually eliminate it. Perhaps they thought they might need it again, that future threats would require the same brutal methods, or perhaps they understood that destroying the temple would require acknowledging what it had been used for, and even that limited admission was more than they could bear. The sealing itself was an elaborate ritual designed as much to bind tongues as to close doors. Those who participated were sworn to magical oaths that would kill them if they spoke of what they had seen. Workers who had helped construct the seals were themselves eliminated to prevent any knowledge of the temple's location from surviving. The few Sheikah who knew the full truth were bound by oaths so powerful that even their descendants would feel compulsion to maintain silence. The Sun's Song, supposedly discovered by the royal family and shared as a gift to the people, takes on sinister implications when understood in context. A song that freezes the undead, that forces them into temporary paralysis. This wasn't developed through casual musical experimentation. This was weapons research, an attempt to control the inevitable consequences of the Shadow Temple's activities. The royal family knew that their atrocities were creating undead, that the concentrated suffering was manifesting as redeeds and gibdos, and rather than stop the practices causing these manifestations, they developed magical countermeasures. The proliferation of undead throughout Hyrule can be traced directly back to the royal family's actions. Every Rediyad that terrorizes travelers, every Poe that haunts the night, every Stalfos that guards forgotten ruins, they're all consequences of the spiritual imbalance created by the Shadow Temple. The royal family's torture program didn't just destroy individual lives, but damaged the very fabric of reality, creating wounds in the spiritual realm that continue to bleed darkness into the physical world. Even more damning is evidence that the royal family used the Shadow Temple to eliminate their own members who showed signs of moral conscience, princes who questioned the kingdom's methods, queens who showed too much mercy, cousins who suggested reform. All could find themselves designated as threats to stability. The royal bloodline was pruned of compassion through the same brutal methods used on external enemies, ensuring that only those capable of maintaining the system would inherit power. The generational consequences of these atrocities extend far beyond immediate victims. Children grew up without parents, never knowing why they disappeared. Communities were decimated by the removal of their leaders and thinkers. Entire schools of thought were eliminated when their proponents were designated as threats. The intellectual and cultural damage to Hyrule was incalculable, creating gaps in knowledge and tradition that could never be recovered. The Sheikah's near disappearance from Hyrule wasn't natural decline, but deliberate policy. As the only witnesses to the full extent of royal atrocities, they posed an ongoing threat to the crown's reputation. Through a combination of forced dispersal, encouraged emigration, and, when necessary, elimination, the royal family ensured that those who knew the most about the Shadow Temple would never be in a position to reveal its secrets. Impa's position as one of the last known Sheikah isn't honor but isolation. She represents the sole survivor of a systematic purge. Contemporary Hyrule still bears the scars of these historical crimes, even if most citizens don't recognize them as such. The persistent monster problems that plague the kingdom, the recurring cycles of catastrophe that require heroes to resolve, the spiritual imbalances that allow entities like Ganondorf to repeatedly return, all can be traced back to the karmic debt incurred by the Shadow Temple's operations. The kingdom isn't cursed by external forces, but by the weight of its own unacknowledged crimes. The irony is that in trying to protect their power through brutality, the royal family ultimately weakened the very foundations of their authority. The Shadow Temple created more enemies than it eliminated, turning loyal subjects into bitter opponents through the disappearance of loved ones. The resources devoted to torture and cover-ups could have been used for actual defense and development. The spiritual corruption released by concentrated suffering made the kingdom vulnerable to exactly the kinds of dark forces the royal family claimed to be protecting against. As we observe the cheerful facade of modern Kakariko Village, the innocent play of children near the well, the peaceful daily routines of citizens who have no idea what lies beneath their feet, we see the ultimate success and failure of the royal family's cover-up. They succeeded in hiding the physical evidence of their crimes, in silencing those who knew the truth, in rewriting history to exclude their darkest chapters. But they failed to escape the consequences of their actions, which manifest in every monster attack, every mysterious disappearance, every cycle of destruction that requires divine intervention to resolve. The Shadow Temple may be sealed, but its legacy remains written in the very stones of Hyrule, a testament to the truth that no amount of royal authority can completely erase the consequences of systematic evil. The Shadow Temple exists not in isolation, but as a dark thread woven throughout the grand tapestry of Ocarina of Time's narrative, connecting to every other sacred space and revealing how completely Ganondorf's corruption transformed Hyrule's spiritual landscape. When the hero of time awakens from his 7-year slumber, he emerges into a world where every temple has been twisted from its original purpose, but none more thoroughly than the Shadow Temple, which merely had to embrace what it had already become. The 7-year transformation period while Link slept in the sacred realm represents more than just Ganondorf's rise to power. It marks the moment when all of Hyrule's hidden darkness was finally given permission to surface. The Shadow Temple, already a place of horror, became something worse. Justified horror, sanctioned by the new order, its methods no longer hidden but celebrated as the proper fate for those who opposed the King of Evil. What had been the royal family's shameful secret became Ganondorf's proud demonstration of power. During those 7 years, the temple's torture chambers weren't abandoned but amplified. Ganondorf's minions learned from the Sheikah's careful notes, studying techniques developed over centuries and improving upon them with their own cruel innovations. The difference was that while the royal family had tried to hide their atrocities, Ganondorf wanted them known. Fear, he understood, was most effective when its source was understood, when potential rebels knew exactly what awaited them should they resist. The corruption of sacred spaces follows a pattern that the Shadow Temple exemplifies. Where the forest temple became overgrown with parasitic vegetation and the fire temple was awakened to volcanic fury, the Shadow Temple simply had its true nature revealed. It didn't need to be corrupted because it was already corruption incarnate. Ganondorf's dark magic didn't transform the Shadow Temple. It liberated it, removing the last pretenses that this was anything other than a monument to systematized evil. Adult Link's confrontation with this space carries profound psychological weight that the game only hints at. This isn't just another dungeon to clear, but a descent into the darkest aspects of the kingdom he's sworn to protect. Every torture device he passes, every bloodstain he steps over, every undead creature he defeats represents a failure of the very system he's fighting to restore. The hero of time must confront not external evil, but the internal rot that made Ganondorf's conquest possible. The Shadow Medallion that Link receives upon completing the temple holds particular significance among the 6 medallions. While others represent natural forces or elemental powers, the Shadow Medallion embodies something far more complex, the acknowledgement of darkness as an inextricable part of Hyrule's identity. Receiving it from Impa, the last of the Sheikah, creates a moment of profound moral complexity. She's not just granting him power, but confession, passing on the burden of knowledge about what her people were forced to do in service to the crown. Impa's role as the Shadow. Sage reveals layers of tragic irony. As potentially the last Sheikah, she becomes the eternal guardian of her people's darkest legacy, bound to the very temple that represents their fall from sacred protectors to state torturers. Her appointment as sage isn't honor but penance, forcing her to forever oversee the site of her tribe's greatest shame. When she awakens to her power, she awakens also to the full understanding of everything that occurred within those walls. The necessity of the Shadow Medallion for defeating Ganondorf creates uncomfortable implications. Link cannot save Hyrule without accepting its darkness, cannot restore the kingdom without acknowledging what it truly is beneath the peaceful surface. The power granted by the Shadow Temple, derived from centuries of concentrated suffering, becomes essential to victory. In a sense, all those who died in the temple's chambers contribute to Ganondorf's eventual defeat, their suffering transformed into the very power used to overthrow the tyrant. Sheik's guidance through this portion of the quest takes on special significance when her true identity as Zelda is considered. The Princess of Hyrule, heir to those who ordered the Shadow Temple's atrocities, must guide the hero through evidence of her family's crimes. Her disguise as a Sheikah, adopting the identity of those her ancestors used and ultimately betrayed, represents more than strategic necessity. It's unconscious penance, an attempt to embody those her family wronged, even if she doesn't fully understand the weight of that choice. The warnings Sheik provides about the Shadow Temple differ from her counsel about other dungeons, where she speaks of forest spirits and ancient dragons with reverence. Her words about the Shadow Temple carry dread that transcends mere danger. She knows, perhaps through ancestral memory or Impa's teaching, what this place truly represents. Her warnings aren't about the physical dangers within, but about the spiritual contamination that comes from exposure to concentrated evil. The temple's test isn't primarily about courage versus cowardice, but about maintaining one's humanity when confronted with systematic inhumanity. Every room Link enters presents evidence of deliberate cruelty, challenging not his sword arm, but his ability to continue believing in the worth of the kingdom he's fighting to save. Lesser heroes might have emerged from the Shadow Temple, technically victorious, but spiritually broken, unable to reconcile the Hyrule they thought they knew with the one revealed in those blood-stained chambers. The breaking of the cycle of hatred and vengeance represents the Shadow Temple's ultimate challenge. Bongo Bongo embodies centuries of accumulated rage, the compressed fury of countless victims seeking retribution. Defeating it requires not perpetuating that cycle, but ending it, using the lens of truth to see through the distortions of rage to the pain beneath. Link doesn't just kill a monster. He performs an exorcism, releasing souls trapped in an endless loop of suffering and rage. The broader timeline implications of the Shadow Temple extend throughout Hyrule's history. In the timeline where Link fails, the Shadow Temple's evil continues to spread unchecked, contributing to the realm's transformation into the Dark World. In timelines where he succeeds, the temple remains sealed but never cleansed, a wound that refuses to heal, periodically releasing new horrors into the world. No timeline shows the Shadow Temple truly purified, suggesting some evils are too deep to ever fully cleanse. The connection between the Shadow Temple and other corrupted spaces becomes clear when mapping the spiritual geography of Hyrule. The bottom of the well serves as a root system, the Shadow Temple as the trunk, and various cursed locations throughout the kingdom as branches of the same tree of corruption. Redeads in the market town, Pose in the graveyard, Stalfos in hidden caves, all connect back to the original source of systematized suffering that the Shadow Temple represents. Ganondorf's own corruption of sacred spaces seems almost amateur compared to what the royal family accomplished with the Shadow Temple. He transformed temples through external force, imposing his will upon them. But the Shadow Temple was corrupted from within, its very purpose inverted while maintaining the appearance of sacred authority. In a way, Ganondorf was simply following a precedent established by those who claimed to be Hyrule's legitimate rulers. The 7-year period also saw changes in how the Shadow Temple functioned within Ganondorf's new order. No longer hidden, it might have served as a warning to would-be rebels, its existence openly acknowledged as the fate awaiting those who resisted. Or perhaps Ganondorf, recognizing a kindred spirit in the temple's darkness, left it largely untouched, understanding that some evils are most effective when they remain partially hidden, known but not fully understood. The role of the Shadow Medallion in the final battle cannot be understated. When Link faces Ganondorf, He carries with him the concentrated power of Hyrule's darkest secret. Every strike, empowered by the Shadow Medallion, carries the weight of centuries of injustice, turning the royal family's crimes into weapons against a tyrant. There's poetic justice in this. The very atrocities meant to preserve royal power become instrumental in defeating one who seized that power. The temple's position in the sequence of Link's journey, typically one of the last temples completed, means he faces it with full understanding of what's at stake. He's seen the Forest Temple's corruption, witnessed the Fire Temple's rage, navigated the Water Temple's depths. But nothing prepares him for the human evil of the Shadow Temple, the recognition that the greatest darkness in Hyrule wasn't imposed by Ganondorf, but cultivated by those sworn to protect it. As Link emerges from the Shadow Temple, carrying the medallion that proves his confrontation with Hyrule's darkest truths, he's fundamentally changed. The naive boy who pulled the Master's sword, believing in simple stories of good versus evil, has been replaced by someone who understands that heroism sometimes means saving systems that don't deserve salvation, protecting kingdoms built on foundations of bones, fighting for ideals that have already been betrayed by those who claim to uphold them. The Shadow Temple doesn't test Link's courage. It tests his ability to maintain hope despite having every reason to abandon it. Even after decades of analysis and countless theories, the Shadow Temple guards its mysteries with the tenacity of the dead that inhabit its halls. For every question answered, new enigmas emerge from the darkness, creating an ever-expanding web of speculation that reaches far beyond Ocarina of Time, into the very foundations of Hyrule's mythology. These unanswered questions aren't mere curiosities, but fundamental challenges to our understanding of the kingdom's history and the nature of evil itself. The green substance that pools throughout the temple and remains one of the most perplexing mysteries. This luminescent liquid defies all known properties of matter, existing simultaneously as physical substance and spiritual manifestation. Its ability to reanimate the dead suggests connections to the life force itself, yet its corruption of that force into undeath marks it as fundamentally antithetical to natural order. Some theorists propose its liquefied malice, the physical manifestation of concentrated hatred. Others suggest it's the remnants of failed alchemical experiments, attempts to create immortality that instead produced eternal suffering. The substance's behavior raises disturbing questions about consciousness and identity. When bodies rise from these pools as Redeeds or Gibdos, are they the original persons transformed or new entities wearing stolen flesh? The hands that reach from the liquid show signs of deliberate intent, grasping with purpose rather than random motion. If the substance itself possesses awareness, what manner of intelligence guides it? Is it a collective consciousness of all who've died within it, or something older, perhaps predating the temple itself? Connections to malice in later games, particularly Breath of the Wild, suggest this green liquid might be an earlier manifestation of the same fundamental force. But where Calamity Ganon's malice appears red and burning with active hatred, the Shadow Temple's substance seems older, colder, more deliberate in its corruption. Perhaps it represents malice that has fermented over centuries, transformed from hot rage into calculated evil. Or possibly the color difference indicates source, red malice from Ganon's hatred, green from the accumulated suffering of innocent victims. The painting's identity remains frustratingly elusive despite numerous attempts at analysis. Their ability to speak, to provide guidance, to demonstrate awareness of current events within the temple, all point toward something more than simple enchantment. The prominent third eye suggests Sheikah origin, but which Sheikah? The man who could see the truth remains a prime candidate, his spirit somehow bound to these portraits as eternal witness to the temple's horrors. But the paintings appear too numerous, too widespread to represent a single individual. Alternative theories propose the paintings depict the temple's architect, forced to inhabit their creation as punishment for designing such perfect instruments of suffering. Or perhaps they show the last loyal Sheikah who chose to become part of the temple rather than abandon their post. Most disturbing is the possibility that the paintings represent no one, that they're the temple itself developing consciousness, creating a face to communicate with those who enter its domain. Young Link's ability to enter the well raises questions that challenge fundamental assumptions about the temple's timeline. If Bongo Bongo was sealed there during the 7-year gap, the well should have been inaccessible, or at least obviously dangerous during Link's childhood. Yet he enters without apparent difficulty, finding the lens of truth in what should be the prison of a massive shadow beast. This temporal paradox suggests either the seal was somehow permeable to pure-hearted children, or more troublingly, that Bongo Bongo allowed Link to enter, recognizing him as instrumental to its eventual escape. The broken seal timeline becomes even more confused when examining Impa's movements. The village gossip mentions her heading to the graveyard to deal with a monster, but this occurs before the dramatic scene of Bongo Bongo's emergence. Did the seal break multiple times? Was there a gradual weakening that Impa repeatedly reinforced until final catastrophic failure? Or does the timeline fold in on itself around the Shadow Temple, cause and effect becoming scrambled by the concentration of dark power? The Forest Temple paintings discovered in the 3-dimensional version add layers of complexity that might be coincidence or might reveal fundamental truths. If these paintings truly depict the Shadow Temple's fairy, it suggests the Forest Temple's creators knew about and possibly approved of the Shadow Temple's original purpose. This connection between temples implies a unified plan, a systematic approach to death and renewal that spanned multiple sacred sites. But why would such knowledge be added only to the remake? Are these details corrections to the original, or additions that change the fundamental narrative? Alternative interpretations of the temple's purpose proliferate among scholars who refuse to accept the torture chamber explanation. Some propose it was a quarantine, facility for those infected with dark magic, the torture equipment actually being medical devices for extreme treatments. Others suggest it was a training ground, where Sheikah warriors learned to resist interrogation by experiencing it firsthand. A few even argue it was a voluntary ritual space where individuals sought transformation through suffering, though this theory struggles to explain the obvious unwillingness of many victims. The possibility of the temple being a massive seal deserves serious consideration. Perhaps the entire structure was built not to contain prisoners, but to contain something far worse. An ancient evil that required constant feeding of suffering to remain dormant. The torture and execution might have been sacrificial, each death strengthening barriers against something that would destroy all of Hyrule if released. This would explain the royal family's desperate secrecy and the Sheikah's willing participation in atrocities. They weren't just following orders, but preventing apocalypse. Future explorations might reveal connections between the Shadow Temple and locations yet undiscovered. Deep beneath the known chambers, passages might lead to even older structures, places that predate Hylian civilization entirely. The green liquid might flow from some primordial source, an underground ocean of corruption that touches multiple points throughout Hyrule. Every well, every cave, every basement might potentially connect to this vast network of shadow that the temple merely represents the most visible portion of. The lingering mysteries multiply when considering implications for the broader timeline. In the adult timeline, where Hyrule is eventually flooded, does the Shadow Temple remain intact beneath the waves, continuing to generate undead in the ocean depths? In the fallen hero timeline, does Link's failure mean the temple's evil spreads unchecked, contributing to the realm's transformation into the dark world? Each timeline branch suggests different fates for the temple, but none show it truly cleansed or redeemed. Questions about the temple's construction methods remain unanswered. The architecture shows techniques that shouldn't have been possible with the technology available during any known period of Hyrule's history. Stones fused without mortar, mechanisms that operate without visible power sources, preservation of organic material that should have decomposed centuries ago, all suggest either lost knowledge or assistance from beings possessing abilities beyond mortal understanding. The role of the goddesses in allowing such a place to exist challenges comfortable theologies. Did they not know about the Shadow Temple's atrocities? Did they know, but choose not to intervene? Or most disturbingly, did they actually approve, seeing the temple as serving some cosmic purpose beyond mortal comprehension? The presence of the Triforce symbol on the ferry suggests at least some divine acknowledgement of the temple's existence. Speculation about undiscovered chambers runs wild among explorers who insist the known temple represents only a fraction of the actual structure. They point to architectural inconsistencies, passages that seem to lead nowhere, sounds that emanate from behind solid walls. If these theorists are correct, vast sections of the Shadow Temple remain unexplored, containing secrets that might fundamentally alter understanding of Hyrule's history. The possibility that similar temples exist elsewhere cannot be dismissed. If one Shadow Temple was built, why not others? Perhaps every major kingdom has its own hidden chamber of horrors, its own secret space where unforgivable acts were committed in the name of order. The Shadow Temple might be unique only in being discovered, while others remain successfully hidden, their victims forgotten, their perpetrators unpunished. As years pass and new games add to Hyrule's mythology, the Shadow Temple's mysteries deepen rather than resolve. Each new piece of information raises more questions, creating an ever-expanding web of uncertainty that suggests some truths are too terrible for complete revelation. The temple stands as a reminder that beneath every peaceful kingdom lies the potential for systematized evil, that every golden age is built on someone's suffering, and that some mysteries remain unsolved, not because we cannot find answers, but because we're afraid of what those answers might reveal. The shadows grow long now as our journey through the temple's darkness draws to its close. The hero of time has emerged from those cursed depths, carrying with him knowledge that can never be forgotten. wisdom purchased with witnessing humanity's capacity for systematic cruelty. Yet in his emergence, in his continuation despite everything seen and learned, lies perhaps the temple's most important lesson, that even the darkest truths need not destroy our capacity for hope. Above ground, Kakariko Village sleeps peacefully tonight. Children dream in beds mere meters from where torture chambers once echoed with screams. Families share evening meals, unaware that beneath their feet lies evidence of atrocities their kingdom would rather forget. And perhaps that ignorance is its own form of mercy, allowing life to continue, love to flourish, communities to thrive despite the darkness that lurks beneath every foundation. The Shadow Temple remains sealed once more, its secrets told, its ghosts acknowledged if not laid to rest. Bongo Bongo has been defeated, the concentration of hatred dispersed, though never truly destroyed. For darkness, like light, is eternal. Only its forms change, only its intensity varies. Tonight, the temple sleeps, and with it we, too, can rest, carrying with us the knowledge that confronting our shadows is the first step toward ensuring they never again consume us. Sleep well and dream of lighter things.